Venice is sinking underwater much faster than anyone was prepared for.
Venice flooded again on Tuesday, with water levels reaching chest high.
Look at how much the water has risen in the past 200 years, and it's possible Venice could disappear in the next century. So they took a big risk to prepare for the future. They spent $8 billion on a crazy idea to block all the water from coming in, and it's not even working.
Tuesday's flooding, however, could have been avoided if the newly installed barrier system had raised properly.
Hi, I'm Mohsen Khan, an engineer here in New York City, and today we'll figure out how to save Venice from sinking underwater. This is Venice on the map, and out here you might notice something, a thin stretch of land that looks like it's protecting the city from the sea. It's why they call it the floating city. With the maze of canals and buildings rising straight out of the water, it really does look like it's floating. But what the map doesn't show is that Venice isn't actually floating. It's sitting on solid ground, and it looks like this. It has all these layers underneath. Basically, the land Venice is built on is mostly sand and silt. For building something as heavy as a city, ideally you'd want stiff clay, because that provides strong foundational support and doesn't compress much under weight. Many buildings in Venice drive wooden logs acting as piles to reach the stiff clay underneath. But placing all that weight of Venice onto ground that's mostly soft sand and silt squeezes the water out from the layers underneath over time, causing them to compact. And as that ground compacts, the city slowly starts sinking under its own weight. And we actually have evidence of this process happening over hundreds of years in this region. Take a look at this chart from a nearby area, Ravenna, which sits on similar ground to Venice. It shows us what's happened over the last 2,000 years, looking at how deep old historical layers were found below today's sea level. You can clearly see the trend. The older the construction or the layer found buried underground, the deeper it is now. It really shows how much the ground here has sunk over hundreds of years. This natural sinking, or what we call subsidence, makes the problem worse, but that's not even the biggest issue for Venice. It's that the ground is sinking while the sea is rising at the same time. For hundreds of years, people in Venice lived with the water. They knew the rhythm. When the tides came up, they dealt with it. They put up walkways, wore some boots, and waited it out. It was just a normal part of life there, but things are different now. That rhythm is gone. The tides are faster, higher, and the floods are not just an occasional thing. They're happening way more often. The numbers are pretty alarming. In the 1960s, they saw high water about 10 times a year. Now, it's more than 60. It's not just handling the 60 floods that's the issue. It's the fact that they've gotten so much more common. If those numbers keep going up this fast, Venice will end up completely underwater. And it really seems like that's where we're heading. People might assume it's just global warming and rising sea levels. While that's true to some extent, for Venice, it's not just that. There's also what's happening in the sea. This here is Venice, and if you zoom out and follow this sea channel south, you'll find one of the key elements, the Sahara. Warm air builds over the desert, and the wind carries it north across the Mediterranean and then the Adriatic, picking up speed and moisture along the way. At the same time, you get cold air coming down from Central Europe, and right off the coast of Venice, these two air masses meet together. This clash causes quick changes in pressure across the lagoon, which makes the tides bigger and more intense. If you get this weather at the same time as the lunar high tide, the sea doesn't rush in, it just slowly rises from underneath. The locals call it acqua alta, which means high water. These aren't like typical big floods. They're fast but pretty quiet when they arrive, but when they keep happening month after month, it makes life here a slow and tiring crisis. Faced with this problem, the city knew they had to do more than just deal with it. They needed a way to stop the water from coming in at all, and that's what they started working on. If you look at Venice from above, you'll spot something right here at the edge of the water. There's a line. It's like a defense system. It's across Venice's three small openings to the sea: Lido, Malmocco, and Chioggia. These are the only entrances to the open sea, and that's where they chose to defend. Blocking these three spots protects the whole city. That's where Mose comes into play. It isn't just a simple line. It's one of the biggest engineering projects ever done to stop floods. Under the surface, just below those inlets, are 78 giant gates divided across the three entry points. Each one is like a hollow steel box, the size of a small ship, attached with hinges at the bottom. When it's not in use, they lie flat on the city floor, completely out of sight. As the water rises, compressed air gets pumped into the gates. They rise slowly, but with a lot of force, tilt up from the seabed. They swing up on hinges like underwater drawbridges that create a temporary wall across the inlets. From above, it looks like the ocean hits a wall and just stops. The Adriatic is rough on one side, but Venice just holds still and stays dry. The clever thing is, they design each section differently. At Malmocco, where the cargo ships come in, the gates are longer and stronger because of the strong currents. At Lido, being the longest area, you'll find the most gates, 21 of them spanning almost 1,600 feet. And at Chioggia, Down south, they made it tighter so they can close the channels quickly. All these gates are connected by tunnels underground where technicians can walk and monitor and maintain the system. Up above ground, there's control centers checking everything to monitor tides, pressure, wind patterns, even moon phases. Because Mose doesn't just react, it plans ahead. It needs 6 hours to get ready, so there isn't much room for mistakes. But when it works, it's like magic. It's an impressive engineering achievement. Before everyone was on board with this bold project, there was a lot of skepticism. It all started in 1966 with the massive flood that put Venice underwater. The water went over 1.9 meters and thousands were displaced. It was a huge wake-up call. Pictures of flooded places and people in boats shocked everyone, turning Venice from a postcard city into an emergency. The Italian government called it a national priority, but the truth is no one really knew what to do. Experts were brought in, engineers, architects, oceanographers, some of Europe's brightest minds. But instead of a clear solution, they got a lot of different ideas. Breakwaters, levees, even lifting the city stone by stone was proposed. For years, there were lots of discussions, but not a lot of action. They couldn't figure out how to save Venice without destroying its ancient foundations or vital shipping routes. No one wanted to ruin the city in the name of protecting it. For decades, they only did temporary fixes. And then someone proposed something completely different. Not a dam or a fixed wall, but a system that could be hidden when it's not needed. Mobile gates hidden underwater that would rise when the sea did. It was a bold plan to work with the sea instead of just blocking it. Let the water in most of the time, but close it off when there's a surge. This plan, called Mose, was approved in 1981, but they didn't start building it until 20 years later. Building Mose wasn't easy either. Progress was slow, it cost way more than expected, and there were all sorts of issues with politics and accusations of corruption. But despite the chaos, the work pushed forward. Everyone knew the fundamental truth. Venice had to do something or the sea would take over. So Mose got built little by little. After almost 20 years of construction, the moment to see if it actually worked finally arrived. They were expecting a big tide, 135 centimeters, which would cause major floods. The city prepared with shops securing down things and locals taking out their floodboards. Meanwhile, the Mose system was starting to activate. Technicians sealed the tunnels, compressed air was pumped in, and those big gates slowly started rising. From the surface, you wouldn't see much, just a little ripple. But underwater, those 78 steel gates were forming a strong barrier against the Adriatic surge. The sea pushed hard on the outside, but inside the lagoon, the water didn't move. St. Mark's Square, which usually gets hit first, was totally dry. Mose worked. Venice stayed dry. Everyone felt so relieved and they were amazed that it actually worked like it was supposed to. That one success isn't the whole picture though. Mose, as good as it is, isn't a perfect fix forever. It was designed in the 80s and built in the early 2000s, and it wasn't meant to be erased constantly. Originally, it was only meant for those exceptionally high tides. But the problem is, the tides aren't exceptional anymore. They're happening way more often. In the 1970s, Venice flooded about 10 times a year. Today, it's more than 60. Some forecasts suggest that by 2050, Mose may need to activate every other day. Using it that much isn't just difficult, it's dangerous for a few reasons. Every time it's activated, it costs thousands in energy and labor, and keeping the gates up too often harms the lagoon's delicate ecosystem, disrupting fish migration and slowing water circulation. Plus, there's the issue of ships. Cargo traffic and cruise liners can't move when Mose is up. The ports shut down, so they have to choose between saving Venice from floods and keeping the city running. And then you have to consider, what happens if the sea levels rise faster than Mose was designed to handle it in the long run? Because sea level rise isn't a theory anymore, it's backed by data and it's speeding up. Because it's speeding up, some climate models suggest that by the end of the century, high tides could permanently reach levels that Mose was only ever meant to stop occasionally. So yeah, Mose works for now. It bought Venice time, but it didn't solve the problem. It just hit pause on the problem. Venice did look into another idea though, something pretty different. You know how we mentioned the city sinking from its own weight? Well, researchers had noticed that one major reason the land compacted was because people used to drill wells and extract water stored underground. If removing water causes it to sink faster, could adding water back do the opposite? Trying to lift a city sounds crazy, but it's a real idea. It was first proposed in the 1970s and they actually tested it on a nearby island, Poveglia. They injected a special fluid cement mixture beneath it and the results were incredibly effective. The entire island rose 4 inches. This was a small proof of concept, but a promising one. Now scientists are looking at the same idea, but on a much larger scale. Instead of using cement, they plan to pump billions of gallons of seawater under the city. Here's how that would work. They put these injection wells all around the city in a 6-mile radius. Over a decade or so, billions of gallons of seawater would be slowly pumped underground. As pressure builds up beneath the sediment layers, Venice would rise, potentially by as much as 1 foot. This isn't just a wild idea. This same technique is actually what's used on oil rigs and offshore platforms to help stabilize their foundations. And yes, on paper, the principle works. But in Venice, this needs extreme precision. Any major shift beneath the lagoon has to be slow, uniform, and incredibly well monitored. Because raising Venice unevenly, even by a tiny amount, could potentially damage its historic buildings more severely than the floods themselves. Cracks and structural damage could become a major threat. Trying to lift buildings that are over 1,000 years old need to be perfectly uniform, as any wrong move could ruin the delicate structures. So this seawater injection plan is just one part of Venice's multi-layered defense. It's just a backup for now, not the main solution. It's meant to work slowly, in the background, gradually shifting the city's position just enough to help counter floodwaters. But its success relies on incredibly slow, calculated movements and constant monitoring. Even a slight inconsistency in the pressure could jeopardize the city's stability. What makes it especially challenging is that this reverse sinking process could take years to show visible results. For now, this plan remains on hold, but it's an essential backup if MOSE isn't enough in the long run. Venice is trying to balance protecting itself right now with big plans for the future as the sea levels keep rising. Injecting seawater is a risk, but it might lift them up just enough if it works out. The solutions are just as complicated as the problem. Between MOSE and the idea of lifting the city, there aren't any guarantees it'll work forever. Venice's fight against sinking ground and rising seas is part of what's happening to cities all over the world because of climate change. At the end of the day, Venice might survive because the people who live there don't want to give up. They won't let it sink. Today, Venice is still standing, a symbol of hope and the determination of people when they face huge challenges. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Until next time.